The air inside the slavehold was heavy and full of fear. Metal walls pressed in from every side, cold and unkind. Dozens of prisoners sat in silence, chained together, their eyes empty. Some were tall, with scales and sharp horns. Some were small, with fragile wings or glowing skin. But all of them had the same look, the look of those who had lost hope. Among them sat a young alien girl, her body thin, her face pale. She hugged her knees and trembled whenever the ship shook. She had been taken from her home weeks ago. Stolen in the night, her people were peaceful farmers, not warriors. When the slavers came, they had no chance. She remembered the screams of her family. She remembered the burning of her village, and now she remembered only the darkness of this prison. Every hour, the guards passed by, tall, cruel beings with armor of black metal. Their glowing red eyes searched the captives. If any slave made a sound, the guards beat them with electric rods. That was why the hold was called the Chains of Silence. Here, no one dared to speak here. Even whispers could bring pain. But then, one day, something changed. The heavy door opened with a loud hiss. 2 guards entered, dragging another prisoner between them. He was taller than the girl, broader than the others. His skin was pale, his hair dark. He was not like the rest. He was human. The slaves lifted their heads, surprise flashing in their tired eyes. Many had heard of humans. Some said they were dangerous. Some said they were clever, but most had never seen one before. Now one stood before them, hands bound, but his back was straight. He did not stumble like the others. He walked with quiet strength. The guards shoved him down and locked his chains. Then they left, laughing. The door closed again, leaving the prisoners in silence. The human sat still, breathing slowly. His eyes scanned the room. He saw the broken faces, the trembling hands, the silent tears, but his own eyes did not show fear. They showed something else, calm. The alien girl could not stop looking at him. Her heart beat faster, not in fear, but in strange hope. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Please, human, just get us out of here." For a moment, the human said nothing. He only turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. It was not the look of a slave. It was the look of someone waiting, watching, thinking. In that single glance, she felt a spark, as if the chains around her wrists had grown lighter. Hours passed, but the human never panicked. Where others cried, he was silent. Where others bent, he sat tall. At night, when the guards were gone, the girl whispered again, "How are you? Not afraid?" The human spoke for the first time, his voice low but firm. "Fear is useless here. Only patience matters." The words spread through the hold like fire. The other slaves listened, their hearts shaking. No one had dared to speak before, but the human's calm voice broke the silence. It was the first time in weeks that they felt more than fear. The guards returned, angry at the noise. One struck the human across the face with the electric rod. The sound echoed, and the girl gasped. But the human did not cry out. He only stared. Back at the guard with steady eyes, the guard growled and left, unsettled. The human's calm was stronger than pain. That night, when all was quiet, the alien girl whispered again, "You are different. You are not broken like us." The human looked at her, and though he said nothing, his silence was louder than any word. It was the silence of strength, not weakness. The silence of someone waiting for the right moment. For the first time since her capture, the girl allowed herself to believe in something. Perhaps in this cold prison, hope had returned. Perhaps the human would truly find a way. Perhaps the chains of silence would one day break. The human sat in the shadows of the slave hold, chains heavy on his wrists. He did not speak much, but his eyes were never still. They moved across the room like sharp blades, studying every detail. The guards thought he was broken like the others, but the truth was different. He was watching, learning, waiting. The alien girl, who had first whispered to him, kept stealing glances. Others too began to notice him. His presence was different. Even in silence, he gave off something powerful, a strange calmness that none of them had felt since they were captured. Every time the heavy door opened, the human's gaze followed. He studied the way the guards walked. He counted how many steps they took. He noticed which guard carried the keys, and which one was careless. The other slaves had been too broken to notice these small things. But the human missed nothing. At night, when the ship grew quiet and only the hum of engines filled the air, the girl whispered again, "What are you looking for?" The human answered softly, "Patterns. Everything has a pattern, and every pattern has a weakness." The girl's eyes widened. She did not understand fully, but she felt his words dig deep inside her chest. For weeks, she had seen no weakness. In the slavers, they seemed like giants, unshakable, untouchable. But the human spoke as if their power was nothing but a puzzle waiting to be solved. The days went on. The slaves noticed more about him. He did not waste his strength on fear. When food was thrown in small scraps, barely enough for one, the human gave some away to the weakest, not out of kindness alone, but out of strategy. He knew strong bonds could matter more than strong muscles. The guards began to notice the stares of the other slaves. One day, a guard stomped into the hold and pointed at the human. "You think you are strong, human? You think you are clever?" The guard hit him with the electric rod, sparks flashing. The human fell to one knee, but his eyes never broke. He stood up slowly, his chains clinking. His calm stare made the guard uncomfortable. For the first time, the guard looked away that night. Whispers spread in the hold. "He is not afraid." He stood after the shock. He looks at them as if they are not gods but only men. The spark of belief grew brighter. The human never encouraged them with false promises. He did not say, "I will save you." He only said, "Watch carefully, wait patiently. Your chains are not forever." The girl asked him one night, "Why are you so sure?" The human looked at her, his gaze steady as ever. "Because nothing built by hands lasts forever, and these chains were made by hands." His words made her shiver. It was such a simple truth, yet no one had thought of it. The slavers seemed too powerful, too cruel, but the human reminded them that power could break, and cruelty could fall. One evening, when the guards dragged prisoners for forced labor, the human was among them. The girl's heart pounded as she watched him leave. Hours passed. Then the guards returned with the group. The human's face was bruised, his hands scraped, but his eyes were sharper than before. He had seen more of the ship. He had counted more guards. He had found more patterns. The girl whispered when he returned, "What did you see?" The human replied, his voice low, "I saw mistakes, small ones, but mistakes all the same. And mistakes can be used." The girl's breath caught in her throat. Hope burned brighter in her chest now. She realized that he was not only watching, he was planning. The other slaves began to shift in their silence. They sat straighter, their eyes no longer empty. The hold felt less like a grave and more like a waiting place, waiting for something to happen. The human never smiled, but when he looked at the others, there was a fire behind his eyes, the fire of a soldier who had seen battles before, and who would fight again. The guards still laughed at the captives. They still struck them with rods and mocked their weakness. But when their backs were turned, the slaves no longer looked broken. They looked at the human. They followed his gaze. They waited, just as he waited. The girl whispered one final time before sleep, "Do you really think we can get out?" The human looked at her with steady eyes, and though he spoke only one word, it was enough to shake the darkness. "Yes." Asterisk. The slaves had begun to whisper again. They whispered not about their fear, but about the human. Every glance, every movement he made carried weight. The chains that once kept their spirits low now rattled with secret hope. But the slavers had their own games. To them, slaves were not people. They were toys, tools, and sometimes entertainment. One cycle. The heavy door opened wider than usual. Guards stepped in with cruel smiles on their faces. They pointed at random prisoners, dragging them out by their chains. The alien girl clutched her knees, fear rushing back into her chest. She knew what this meant. The fights. Slavers forced captives to fight each other while they watched. The weak were broken. The strong were used until they too collapsed. No one ever truly won. The only winners were the slavers who laughed and cheered from their seats. The human's name was called next. The girl's heart sank as two guards yanked him to his feet. His chains rattled, but he did not resist. He walked calmly as they dragged him away. The last thing the girl heard was the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. The arena was no grand coliseum. It was a cold chamber with lights burning harsh from above. Slaves were thrown into the center like animals. The guards and slavers sat around, drinking, laughing, betting. In the middle, the human stood, his wrists chained together, his face unreadable. Across from him, another slave stumbled forward. This one was massive, a reptilian beast with scales like armor and claws sharp as blades. He roared in pain and fear, forced to fight. His body trembled, not from weakness, but from hunger and wounds. The guards shoved him forward, shouting, "Fight, or both die." The human looked at the reptilian. He saw the desperation in his eyes. This was not an enemy. This was another prisoner, another soul broken by chains. The crowd jeered, their voices echoing in the chamber. "Kill him! Tear him apart!" The reptilian charged, claws slicing through the air. The human moved with sharp precision. He sidestepped, his chains clashing as he shifted. The reptilian swung again, wild, desperate. The human ducked low, then struck with his shoulder, sending the beast stumbling. The crowd roared with laughter. They thought it was all part of the show. But the human's gaze was different. He was not fighting to win. He was fighting to send a message. The reptilian attacked again, but this time, the human caught his arm, using the chain around his wrists. He twisted hard. The reptilian fell to the ground with a loud crash. The human pinned him, pressing his weight down, but he did not kill. He held him there, forcing him still without breaking him. The guards shouted angrily, "Finish it! Kill him!" The human stared at them, silent, then slowly released the reptilian. He stood tall, his chest rising with steady breaths, his eyes locked with the guards, cold and fearless. He had won the fight without blood. Without surrendering to cruelty, the arena fell into strange silence. The slaves watching from the corners widened their eyes. The crowd of slavers laughed awkwardly. Some spat in anger, others muttered in disbelief. No one had ever disobeyed so openly, and yet the human had done it without a word. The guards dragged him back. Furious, they struck him with rods, sparks burning across his skin. But even as he stumbled into the slave hold again, his eyes were the same, calm and sharp. The girl rushed to him, whispering, "Why didn't you fight to kill?" The human looked at her, his voice quiet. "Because they want us to be animals." "But we are not animals." The other slaves listened, their hearts shaking. For so long they had believed they had no choice, to fight, to bleed, to die for the amusement of their masters. But the human had shown them another path. He had shown them that defiance could exist even in chains. The reptilian was dragged back later, beaten and exhausted. But when he saw the human, he did not snarl. Instead, he lowered his head in respect. The girl saw this and felt her chest tighten with something new, unity. The slavers thought the fight was just another game. But in truth, something had changed. The slaves had seen the human stand against cruelty without breaking, and in their silence, they began to whisper again. Not with fear, but with faith. That night, when the lights dimmed and the guards left, the girl leaned close and whispered, "You are not like us, human. You are something else." The human's gaze turned to her, his eyes steady, his voice low. "No, I am like you. But I remember what they want you to forget, that even in chains, we are not theirs to own." The hold fell silent, but it was no longer the silence of despair. It was the silence before a storm. The human had planted something dangerous in their hearts, not fear, but courage, and the slavers did not see it yet. But the chains of silence were beginning to crack. The slavehold was no longer the same. Something invisible had changed after the human's fight. The others had seen him stand against cruelty without killing. They had seen him refuse to bow even when beaten. And for the first time in many dark cycles, they felt the faint light of courage. The guards did not notice it at first. To them, the slaves still sat chained in silence, still weak, still broken, but in the shadows and whispers too soft for ears of iron. A quiet fire began to spread. The young alien girl was the first to speak again. She sat close to the human, her voice trembling but brave. "You said everything has a weakness," she whispered. "What weakness do the slavers have?" The human's eyes moved slowly, studying the walls, the doors, the guards outside. He leaned closer and spoke with a calm tone. "They believe fear is stronger than hope. That is their weakness. They never imagine slaves can think. They never imagine slaves can fight together." The girl shivered. His words were dangerous. Even whispers could bring punishment. But instead of fear, she felt her chest tighten with something else. Possibility. Other slaves leaned closer. A winged being with broken feathers, a scaled warrior with scars across his body, a small child whose glowing skin had dimmed with hunger. They all listened, their eyes fixed on the human. He spoke slowly, not giving promises, only truths. "Alone, you are weak. Together, you are not. If we move as one, even chains cannot hold us." The reptilian slave who had once fought him grunted softly. He lowered his gaze in respect. "If you lead, we will follow." The human did not nod, did not smile. He only said, "Not yet. Patience first. We must learn. We must prepare." And so it began, not a rebellion of fire, but of whispers. The human taught them how to watch without being seen, how to listen to the guards' footsteps, how to count the seconds between patrols, how to mark the rhythm of the ship's engines. Every detail was a weapon, every observation a step toward freedom. The girl became his closest helper. She remembered what he said and repeated it to those too far to hear. Her small voice carried the seeds of courage from corner to corner. And slowly, the chains of silence became chains of whispers. The guards began to feel uneasy. They saw eyes that no longer looked dead. They heard faint sounds when there should have been none. They struck harder with their rods, trying to crush the spark. But the human always stood tall after every blow. And his strength gave the others strength. One night, when the lights dimmed and the guards grew lazy, the human whispered to the girl, "Tell him this. A storm waits in silence, but when it comes, nothing will stand." She repeated the words to the others, and the fire grew. But rebellion is never hidden for long. One guard noticed too much whispering. He stormed into the hold, striking the nearest slave. "Quiet, you are nothing," he roared. His red eyes scanned the room. Then they stopped on the human. "You," the guard growled. "You make them restless." The guard raised his rod to strike. But before the blow could land, the reptilian slave stepped forward. He lowered his head and spoke quickly. "It was me, not him," the guard snarled, suspicious. But the human's calm eyes gave nothing away. The guard struck the reptilian instead, beating him until he collapsed. Then he left, laughing. The human bent down and lifted the reptilian. He whispered firmly, "You did well. You remembered together. We survive." The reptilian groaned, but managed a smile. For the first time since capture, his eyes carried pride. From that night on, the slaves no longer thought of themselves as separate. They began to breathe as one, to wait as one, and to dream as one. Still, the human warned them, "Dreams mean nothing without action, and action without patience is death. Wait for the right moment. It will come," the girl asked him softly. "How will we know the moment?" The human's gaze was sharp, his voice steady. "You will feel it, like the breaking of a chain. When the slavers make their greatest mistake, that is when we move." His words wrapped around them like armor. And though their bodies were still chained, their hearts were no longer prisoners. The guards believed silence still ruled the hold. But in truth, rebellion lived there now. It lived in whispers, in glances, in steady breaths, and in the unshakable gaze of the human. The storm was not here yet, but it was coming, and when it broke, The galaxy itself would hear the sound. The days grew longer inside the slavehold. The chains were still heavy, the guards still cruel. But the whispers had become stronger. The prisoners no longer saw themselves as broken. They saw themselves as waiting for the humans. Signal, the human never rushed. He sat quietly, watching, always watching. His gaze moved across the walls, the ceiling, the guards. Every detail became part of his map. Every mistake of the slavers was written in his memory. One evening, when the lights dimmed and the guards left for their shift change, the human leaned close to the alien girl. His voice was low, steady, almost like the hum of the engines. Tomorrow we test them. A small fire, nothing more. It will show us how fast they respond, how many guards they send, and how careless they are. The girl's eyes widened in fear. But what if they kill us all? The human's gaze was sharp, unshaken. They will not. We are too valuable as slaves. They think we are too weak to be dangerous. That is their mistake. The next cycle, the plan began. It started with scraps, bits of cloth, a piece of metal, hidden in chains, a tiny spark from a guard's careless rod, and soon a small fire burned in the corner of the hold. The flames were weak, but the smoke curled thick into the air. The guards rushed in at once, shouting. They struck at the slaves, trying to silence the chaos. But the human had already counted. 3 guards came, no more. They were careless, panicked. And in their panic, they revealed something important. A small control panel near the door. It shut off the locks of the chains, but only the guards could reach it. The human's eyes caught it, memorized it. Then he sat still, as if nothing mattered. The guards beat the reptilian slave for the smoke. They left him bloody on the floor, but he grinned through his pain, because he knew they had learned something valuable. That night, the whispers spread. They fear fire. They have only 3 guards. The panel can open chains. The girl asked the human softly, was it worth his pain? The human's answer was calm. Every step costs something. If we stop, we lose forever. If we move, we pay a price. But the price of freedom is always less than the price of chains. The others nodded in silence. They understood now that every wound, every scar, was part of the path forward. The next test came days later. This time, the human signaled the winged slave, the one with broken feathers but sharp eyes. Drop during labor, the human told him. Fall near the corridor. Force them to carry you back. Count how many doors. You see, count how many guards follow. The winged slave obeyed. He collapsed during work, his body shaking as if he were dying. The guards cursed and dragged him through the halls. He looked carefully, counting everything. When he returned, he whispered what he saw. 3 doors, 1 heavy gate, and weapons in the next room. The human's eyes sharpened. Piece by piece, the map grew in his mind. The slaves were learning, not just to wait, but to think. But with every whisper of rebellion, the danger grew too. The guards were not fools. They began to sense something strange. The slaves no longer looked broken. Their eyes carried sparks the guards did not like. So the punishments became harsher. Whips cracked louder, rods burned deeper, yet the human never broke. And because he did not break, the others did not either. One night, as the ship drifted in silent space, the human finally gathered them close. His voice was low, but it carried power. We have tested enough. We know their patterns. We know their gates. We know their weapons. Soon we will strike. The girl shivered. Her small voice asked, when? How? The human's eyes narrowed. When the fire is real. When the chaos is too large for them to control. We will not just make smoke. We will burn their ship, and in that fire we will run. The slaves looked at one another, fear and hope mixing. In their hearts, could it really happen? Could chains fall away in the middle of fire and screams? The human leaned forward, his eyes burning like steel. Remember this. Fear is their weapon, but unity is ours. When the fire rises, you will not think of fear. You will think of freedom, and you will move. The girl closed her eyes. She could almost see it, the fire spreading, the guards running, the chains breaking, and in the center of it all, the human leading them through the chaos. The guards outside still laughed, still believed the slaves were powerless, but inside the hold, the whispers had turned into a plan. The storm was building, and soon fire would light the darkness. The ship drifted through the endless dark of space. To the slavers, it was just another night. They laughed, drank, and mocked the silence of their chained prisoners. But inside the slave hold, silence was no longer fear. It was the silence before thunder. The human sat with his back against the cold wall. His eyes were steady, sharp, waiting. Every slave looked at him now. They did not see a captive. They saw a leader, and tonight he gave the signal. He whispered only one word: now. The reptilian slave shifted first, his massive body blocking the guard's view. The winged slave spread his broken feathers, covering the small sparks that lit behind him. The girl's trembling hand struck flint against metal. This time the fire was not small. It leapt across cloth and wood scraps, smoke rolling fast into the air. The alarm rang, sharp and angry. The heavy door burst open, guards rushing inside. Their eyes glowed red, their rods crackled with energy. But the human was already moving. He had studied them for weeks. He knew which guard carried the keys. And in one sudden strike, he drove his chained wrists into the guard's face. The man fell, stunned. The human seized the keys. Chains fell from his wrists with a loud clink. The first sound of freedom. He tossed the keys to the girl. Free them, he ordered. The girl's small fingers shook as she unlocked the others. One by one, chains crashed to the floor. The sound was louder than thunder. The silence of slaves had ended. The guards roared in fury. They swung their rods, sparks flying. But now they faced not broken prisoners. They faced a storm. The reptilian charged, his massive tail smashing one guard into the wall. The winged slave leapt, claws tearing at another. The human fought with precision. He moved like a soldier. Every strike deliberate. A kick to the knee, a blow to the throat. He wasted nothing. Blood stained the floor, but it was not the slaves who fell. It was the guards, one after another. The human led them into the corridor. The halls of the ship shook with alarms. Red lights flashed, shadows danced on metal walls. The slaves ran. Together, their breaths ragged but strong, the girl stayed close to the human. Her fear battled with hope inside her chest. Where are we going? She gasped. The human's voice was calm, even in chaos. To the docking bay. That is our way out. They raced through the first door. The winged slave remembered the path from his mission. 3 doors, he shouted, one heavy gate after. That. The human nodded. Then we make it 3 doors. The first door crashed open. Slaves surged through, beating down the guards who tried to block them. The second door was tougher. Blaster fire cut through the air. One glowing child cried out, hit in the arm, but the human dragged him forward. No stopping, move. They reached the third door, and beyond it, the heavy gate loomed. It pulsed with energy, a barrier of steel and light. The girl froze. How will we pass it? The human's eyes narrowed. Everything built has a weakness, he said again. He ripped a rod from a fallen guard and jammed it into the control panel. Sparks exploded. The gate flickered, and with a scream of metal, it slid open. The slaves poured through, but the chaos had grown. More guards swarmed from every side, weapons drawn, their faces twisted in rage. The human raised his voice, sharp and commanding. Do not break. Stay together. Push forward. The reptilian roared, swinging a massive piece of pipe like a weapon. The winged slave slashed, his broken feathers bleeding but his claws deadly. Even the smallest prisoners fought, kicking, biting, striking with all their strength. They were no longer slaves, they were warriors. The docking bay came into sight. Rows of ships and escape pods gleamed under red alarm lights. The human's eyes burned. Almost there. But standing before the pods were more guards, and at their center, The slaver captain himself, a towering figure in black armor, his voice boomed across the bay. "You dare rise against us? You are nothing." The slaves froze for a moment. The weight of fear pressed down again, but then the human stepped forward, his chains still clinking around his ankles, his body battered but unbroken. He pointed at the captain. "No, we are not nothing, we are free," the slaves roared, their voices louder than the alarms, and together they charged. The storm had broken, and nothing would stop it now. The docking bay shook with alarms. Red lights flashed across the steel walls. Smoke curled from broken panels. Slaves stood together, bruised, bloody, but unbroken, and before them stood the slaver captain, his black armor gleaming like a shadow of death. He raised his weapon, a long blade crackling with red energy. His voice thundered over the chaos. "You will return to your chains, or you will die here. There is no freedom for you." For a moment, fear gripped the slaves. They had come so far, but this figure looked unstoppable. The guards rallied behind him, blasters ready. The air trembled with tension. Then the human stepped forward, chains still heavy on his ankles, bruises fresh on his skin, but his eyes burned with fire. He spoke in a calm voice that carried across the bay. "Freedom is always bought with blood. If it must be mine, so be it." The slaves gasped. The girl's voice cracked as she cried out, "No! Don't go alone." But the human was already moving. He charged the captain. The two figures clashed with a sound like thunder, blade against chain, strength against will. The shockwaves echoed through the docking bay. The captain struck hard, his blade slicing through air. The human dodged, using his chains like weapons. He swung them wide, wrapping them around the captain's arm. With a pull, sparks flew as the blade shifted, but the captain was strong. He yanked the human forward, smashing him with a brutal strike. The human fell to one knee, blood dripping from his mouth. The slaves cried out, but he lifted his head, his eyes never breaking. He rose again, and again the chains lashed forward. He moved not with brute force, but with precision. Every strike aimed not to destroy, but to break balance. The reptilian roared from the side, "Fight, human! We are with you!" The slaves surged forward, clashing with the guards. The bay exploded in chaos, blaster fire, screams, the sound of fists and claws. But their eyes never left the duel. Their hope lived in the human struggle. The captain laughed, his voice cruel. "You think you can defeat me with broken chains? You are nothing but a weak creature from a dying world." The human's voice was steady. "Then remember this. A weak creature can still bite." With a sudden move, he twisted the chain around the captain's leg. He pulled hard, using all his weight. The captain stumbled, armor crashing against the steel floor. The human leapt, striking with the full force of his body. The blade clattered away, sparks flying. The bay fell silent for a moment. The human stood above the captain, chain tight around his throat. The slaver's red eyes glowed with rage, but the human's gaze was colder. "This ends now," he said. Captain tried to rise, but the human pulled tighter, until at last the armor-clad giant fell still. The storm had ended, and the human stood victorious. The slaves erupted in cries that shook the bay. Voices that had been silent for so long now roared with life. Chains rattled, but they were no longer symbols of weakness. They were weapons, they were trophies. They were reminders of what they had overcome. The human turned to them, breathing hard, his body weak, but his eyes unbroken. "Go," he ordered. "Get to the pods now." The girl rushed to him, tears burning her cheeks. "You saved us, but what about you?" The human looked at her, and for the first time, a faint smile touched his face. "I'll follow, but you must lead them now." The slaves hurried into the escape pods. The reptilian carried the wounded. The winged slave guided the children. The alarms screamed louder. The ship's engines began to fail. Explosions shaking the walls. The human moved last, making sure no one was left behind. At the final moment, as the pods launched into space, The girl pressed her hand against the glass. Through the smoke and fire, she saw him standing tall, chains still around his ankles, but his back straight. Her voice whispered, though he could not hear, "You gave us freedom. You gave us hope." The slaver ship exploded in the distance, flames tearing it apart. The pods drifted into the stars, carrying the survivors, their chains broken, their voices alive inside the quiet pod. The girl wiped her tears. Her words trembled, but her heart was strong. "We were slaves, but the humans showed us we are more. He gave us our lives back, and his fight will never be forgotten." The stars stretched before them, endless and bright. The future was uncertain. The danger was not over, but the storm had broken, and the galaxy would remember the day when slaves became free, when one human's courage lit the fire of rebellion. And though the girl did not know where their journey would end, she knew this truth: they had escaped death and chosen freedom forever.